This is Kathy from Gadgets Top 321, and today I'm going to be testing Sailor Manyo Kuzu in a variety of pins and nib sizes ranging from a pilot extra fine up to a 1.5 stub. And I'm going to begin with the pilot extra fine. Now, I don't find myself using this pen much for everyday writing. It's just so extremely fine, but I do enjoy having this pen to test the performance of inks in nibs that perhaps aren't that smooth. This gives me a good idea of how ink will perform in those. And this is a Pilot 78G Plus extra fine. And on this Tomoe River paper, this feels perfectly pleasant to write with. But I have noticed, I think it was on the Rhodia paper, that it didn't feel that great. I noticed that I could feel the tines digging into the paper, and so it wasn't feedbacky, it was actually scratchy. But on this Tomoe River paper, perfectly pleasant to use. Now, the jump from extra fine to fine is a huge, I've noticed in these ink tests I've been doing, is a huge difference in smoothness. This fine nib is just super smooth on this Tomoe River paper, and it was on all the other papers that I tested also. You can see that this fine nib is puts down a little bit more ink than the extra fine. Next, I've got a Jinhao with a medium Jinhao nib. This medium nib is putting down quite a bit more ink, and I really like the way it looks. Now you can see here the writing samples look pretty dark in my lighting, but you can see that this ink is a nice maroon. Next, I've got a Nemesign with a 0.6 stub. Sorry about that. Got to make sure we're still in focus. This Nemesign 0.6 is so smooth. I really enjoy writing with it. As far as stub nibs go, I enjoy using this one for journaling. It's more of an everyday writer. It's not, I've showed this before, but it's not a crisp italic. It's just a totally round nib, but you get some nice line variation. Okay, and I like to use this one, this Nemesign, to switch out nibs. This is a number 6 nib, and I find that it doesn't fit in there super tight, so it's a nice one to use. for my replacement stub nibs that I got. Let me make sure this one should be the 1.1. Yep. Now, this 1.1 and 1.5 stub nib, I don't really use them much for actual writing, like writing in my journal, but I do these that I ink up for these ink tests. I'm gonna dip it. I will use them for headers in my journal, writing the dates and whatnot. I need to re-dip it to make sure that the nib is saturated. And I got these replacement nibs from Anderson Pens, but you can get similar replacement number 6 nibs from Goulet. And Goulet also has number 5 replacement nibs. That was nice and wet. I'm curious to see what that looks like when it dries. When I did the writing sample in my weeks, I think I didn't go back and redip the nib. It's a drier writing sample. And I'm just going to switch nibs one more time off camera to the 1.5. And I'm going to dip it one more time. All right. This ink, I've noticed with all of these inks, when I dip them in the ink samples, the gold plating on these 78Gs really hold on to the ink. So I don't know if that's just a property of gold that the ink will really stick to it. And it does seem to be worse with certain inks. Now this one's not, I put the wrong nib in. I was going to say, that one's not as wet. I did that in a previous video. Did the same thing. I put the Nemesine nib back in there. Sorry about that. It's making this run long. I'll dip this real quick. All right. Try this one more time. Yeah, that's quite a bit wetter. All right, now it's going to take a minute for these two to dry, and I'll show you the ink test that I've already done. Now, in my little ink journal that I keep in little Staples, the little mini notebook, I like to do this. It lets me see how the ink will perform on less than ideal paper. And on this one, it feathered. I wouldn't hardly call that feathering. It tended to spread a little bit, but this was better than several of the previous inks, so that wasn't bad. And part of that is, well, look how quickly that dried. Or this paper, it tended to soak into it pretty good. Well, I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, it didn't really want to go through. Now, here is, I wanted to compare it to a couple of similar inks. Rouge Granat from J.R. Bond, you can see that it's a brighter red. Now, it's coming across a little bit brighter than it is if you compare these two. Rouge Granat is not actually as bright as it appears here, but it is brighter than this. Sailor Kuzu leans a little more brown, and Rouge Granat is more red. This is more of a blood red. This is a reddish brown, I guess. And Sailor Akebi that I did the other day, you can see it's got a little more pink to it. It's more of a burgundy. And it also, that Sailor Akebi, tended to bleed a little bit more. And it also wanted to, it didn't feather too bad, but it did soak through the paper a little more. So that's on So-So paper. And on Rhodia, this ink is more of just a standard ink. It's not, you don't have color variation in it. I guess perhaps when you get it in the right nib, you see some shading, but it was either kind of one extreme or the other. Either it was really wet and deep and velvety and saturated like this one, or on this writing sample, it was, see there, a little more flat. I'm not really seeing the shading in this. I do prefer this ink in like a nice wet medium. It's kind of, it's real, this ink I would say is kind of finicky. It's hard to get the ink flow just right to see the shading. And there it is again compared to Rouge Granat. It's a little, Rouge Granat's a little more red. And someone had asked me to do a writing sample on copy paper, and when we get more copy paper, we're due to get some, I'll start using it. This is 24-pound copy paper, and I got some really good copy paper this time. It's thick, and the ink doesn't want to bleed through, and it doesn't want to feather too bad. So this 24-pound copy paper that I got at Walmart is nice, but I don't think it's representative. It's not representative of the copy paper that I usually use here around the house. Let's see. Here is my Hobonichi Weeks, and I'm not really seeing any sheen. Maybe just a hint of some on this wet medium, but you really have to look for it. It's nothing like the Akebi. The Akebi, you can see on wetter nibs, you get a little more sheen. So Kuzu's more of a flatter ink, and you can see here on the wide nib, the 1.5, it came out a little flatter and drier. I'm seeing a little more shading in the 1.1. So it's a little, this ink is a little more finicky. It's a nice looking ink, but there's no property that really jumps out like some of the others with the sheen and the shading. And here it is compared to the others. These were all written with the 1.5 nib, and now this should have had time to dry. Well, I am seeing a little sheen, a little halo of a sheen on these wetter nibs. So, and I'm seeing it on the medium nib a little more here. So if you put down enough, you will see a little bit of a green sheen. So I take that back. This is a pretty ink. I think I prefer the Akebi more, but this is a nice one. Looks nice in this red Jinhao. Alright, so if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.